In 1877, a man died in New York holding more money than the United States Treasury was keeping in reserve. His name was Cornelius Vanderbilt, and he had built the largest fortune in American history from a single rowboat. 96 years later, in 1973, 120 of his descendants gathered at a family reunion. Not one of them was a millionaire.
The money did not disappear in a crash. There was no war that took it, no fraud, no single catastrophic bet. Nobody stole it. The Vanderbilt fortune was lost slowly, deliberately, and in the most beautiful way money has ever been lost, and the reason is not the one you would guess.
Cornelius Vanderbilt was born in 1794 on Staten Island into a family that farmed and ferried. He had almost no schooling. At 16, he borrowed $100 from his mother and bought a small sailing boat, and he began carrying passengers and freight across the harbor to Manhattan. He worked in weather that kept other boatmen home. He learned a lesson early that would define him for 60 years. When a competitor ran a route, Vanderbilt would run the same route and charge less, sometimes charging nothing at all, until the competitor either sold out to him or was ruined. He did not want a share of the traffic. He wanted the traffic. So how do you go from one boat to the largest fortune in the country? By the 1850s, he owned one of the largest steamship operations in the world, and people had started calling him the Commodore. Then, at an age when most men of his era were finished, he did something strange. He was nearly 70 years old, and he sold his ships, all of them. He had decided that the future of moving things was not on water. He put the money into railroads. He bought lines that connected badly, and then he forced them to connect. He consolidated them into the New York Central, and he built Grand Central Depot in Manhattan to be its heart. In roughly a decade, he turned a shipping fortune into a railroad empire that touched most of the industrial North. When Cornelius Vanderbilt died in 1877, he left behind about $100 million. To understand that number, the entire United States Treasury was holding less in reserve at the time. He was, by a wide margin, the richest man the country had ever produced. And then came the will, and the will is where this story actually begins. The Commodore had 13 children. He left about 95% of everything to one of them, his son, William Henry. The other 12 divided the remainder. He was not being cruel, and he explained his reasoning plainly. He believed that a fortune split 13 ways would stop being a fortune. It would become 13 comfortable lives, and the empire would end. And here is the thing that makes this story worth telling. He was right. Keeping it whole worked. What he never wrote down anywhere was what the money was supposed to be for once it was whole. He protected the fortune from being divided. He never protected it from being pointless. William Henry Vanderbilt had spent most of his life being told by his father that he was not capable. He took the railroad empire in 1877 and ran it for 8 years. In those 8 years, he roughly doubled the fortune to close to $200 million. He remains the last Vanderbilt who ever made the money grow. But William Henry did not repeat his father's decision. When he died in 1885, he divided the fortune among his 8 children. Each of them received an amount that, on its own, made them one of the wealthiest people in the country. And each of them now had something the Commodore never had, an enormous amount of money and absolutely nothing they were required to do with it. So what does a family do with more money than anyone has ever had and no instructions? They build.
Between the 1880s and the 1920s, the Vanderbilts constructed the most extraordinary collection of private houses this country has ever seen, and the scale is genuinely difficult to hold in your head. George Washington Vanderbilt II built Biltmore in the mountains of North Carolina. It has 250 rooms. It covers roughly 175,000 square feet. It remains, to this day, the largest privately owned house in the United States, and it was built for one man and his guests.
In Newport, Rhode Island, they built summer houses they called cottages. The Breakers has 70 rooms and was used for a few weeks a year. Marble House cost $11 million in the 1890s, and roughly $7 million of that was spent on the marble alone. These were not investments. Nobody pretended they were. And this is the mechanism. Every single thing the Commodore bought produced money. The boats carried freight, the railroads carried freight, the depot collected fees. Every single thing his grandchildren bought consumed money. A house does not earn, it costs, every year, forever, and the bigger it is, the more it costs. The spending was not only architectural. In 1895, Alva Vanderbilt arranged the marriage of her 18-year-old daughter Consuelo to the 9th Duke of Marlborough. The family transferred an enormous block of railway stock as part of the arrangement. Consuelo did not want the marriage. Accounts from the day describe her crying behind her veil at the ceremony. The marriage ended in separation and eventually annulment, but the transaction tells you exactly what the fortune had become by the third generation. The Commodore used money to buy things that made money. His great-granddaughter was used as money to buy a title, which is to say, to buy the appearance of something.
So, how long can a fortune that size actually last? Here is the arithmetic the family appears never to have done. The fortune was not growing. It had stopped growing in 1885, but it was being divided at every generation, and each division created more people, and every one of those people was maintaining houses that cost enormous sums every year simply to stand there. Then the ground moved under them. The federal income tax arrived in 1913. The estate tax followed. The railroads, the actual engine of the whole thing, began a long decline as trucks and then aircraft took the freight. The family had built its life on a machine, and the machine was slowing, and almost nobody in the family was still watching it. Reginald Vanderbilt inherited a fortune and spent his life gambling and drinking through it. He died in 1925 at 45. By then, the trust he had been living on was substantially gone. He left behind a baby daughter named Gloria, who would spend her childhood at the center of a public custody battle over what was left. One by one, the houses went. They were too expensive to keep and too specific to sell. Some were donated, some became museums, some were simply pulled down. The great Vanderbilt mansions that had lined Fifth Avenue in New York, the ones built to announce the family to the world, were demolished. The last one came down in 1947.
So what was left in the end? In 1973, the family held a reunion at Vanderbilt University, the school the Commodore had endowed a century earlier. 120 of his descendants attended. According to the family historian Arthur T. Vanderbilt II, who wrote the definitive account of the decline, there was not a millionaire among them. 96 years, that is the whole span. From the largest fortune in American history to a room full of people who were financially ordinary. 2 generations of building it, 4 generations of spending it. And the strange part is that almost nobody in that room had done anything reckless. They had simply lived the life they were handed. There is one more turn. Gloria Vanderbilt, the daughter of the man who drank the trust away, did not inherit a working fortune. So in the 1970s and 1980s, she built one. She put her name on a line of designer jeans, and it became one of the defining consumer brands of the decade. She made her own money in her own century. Her son is the journalist Anderson Cooper.
He has said publicly that he was never expecting an inheritance, that his mother made it clear there was no trust fund waiting, and that he considers this a favor rather than a loss. 4 generations after Biltmore, a Vanderbilt was describing having no fortune as an advantage.
So what actually destroyed the Vanderbilt fortune? It was not the taxes, though the taxes hurt. It was not the decline of the railroads, though that mattered. It was not any single heir, and it was not bad luck. The fortune died because of a switch that happened quietly between the 2nd generation and the 3rd. The Commodore and his son bought things that produced. Everyone after them bought things that displayed. A railroad earns while you sleep. A marble house takes while you sleep. Once a family's assets stop generating and start consuming, the size of the fortune only determines how long the ending takes. Cornelius Vanderbilt spent his life making sure the fortune would never be divided. He got exactly what he asked for. It was never divided into 13 pieces. It was spent whole over 96 years.